This B Podcast Network show is presented by IXL. IXL's all-inclusive online teaching and learning platform simplifies edtech needs and accelerates achievement in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. IXL delivers personalized learning across a comprehensive pre-K to 12 curriculum, including math, language arts, science, and social studies, and it helps you assess student performance through actionable real-time insights at every level of your school or district. This one solution performs work that typically requires dozens of different tools. Want to find out why so many leading districts trust IXL? Visit ixl.com/BE. That's ixl.com/BE. We're proud to be sponsored by MyFlex Learning. MyFlex Learning is a scheduling platform that helps middle and high schools meet the individual needs of all students. Schools can easily create and manage time for flex blocks, win time, activity periods, RTI, counselor and teacher appointments, and much more. And with its built-in accountability tool and reporting features, MyFlex Learning solves your challenges around getting kids where they need to be and understanding how flex time is spent. Make your flex time work for you. Visit myflexlearning.com/BE to learn more and receive $500 off the first year. That's myflexlearning.com/BE. Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of the Authority Podcast on the B Podcast Network. So for some of you, you may hear the title of this book and think, that can't be so. A boss, that's not a good thing. But we're going to learn today what a good boss is really about. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Eberle Walker. She's an education industry leader with 20 plus years of experience in a variety of roles. Among other roles, she was previously CEO of the Princeton Review, and since 2019 has been the CEO of Presence. And Kate's book is The Good Boss: 9 Ways Every Manager Can Support Women at Work. And so just like Michael Scott once said, boss, that means cool, right? That means a good thing. So Kate, welcome to the show. And I'm really pleased to talk about this book.
Thank you for having me. And I love the Michael Scott reference. I have to say, he's never been brought up in connection with this book before.
Well, right. Yeah, he would be a good example to use probably a variety of times in the book, not necessarily in a positive light, right? But certainly somebody that embodies a certain stereotype of a boss. But I wanted to start with you write about the fact that stories of successful women often start with a story about a good boss, about somebody who really help them to get onto their trajectory, right? Is that how it went for you in your career? Is that kind of what spurred your thinking around this?
Yeah, it's absolutely what happened to me without me even really realizing it or thinking about it or probably appreciating my bosses enough for what they did for me over the years. I realized it actually because I set out to write a different book. I was going to interview a bunch of successful women I knew about their negotiation tactics, about, how to negotiate for more pay, for a promotion. And when I started going around interviewing and talking with women over and over again, I would have people say, you know what, I never actually asked for a promotion. I've never actually asked for a raise in my life. And the strain that connected everyone's stories was they would say, I had a boss who valued me, who appreciated me, who saw my potential and kind of gave me the next step. And then I started thinking back through my own path and realized that the same was absolutely true for me. I hadn't had to ask for and advocate for myself at every step. I would have people, believe in me along the way.
Yeah. And, we talked before we started recording about our common home state of New Jersey. And so, one of the most famous New Jersey residents being the boss, Bruce Springsteen. And actually, something that's not necessarily totally well known about him is that he kind of hates that nickname because he was not necessarily a pro boss person in his upbringing, right? And somebody who thought more about blue collar workers and the fact that the management was typically more there to kind of to keep them down. But in any case, that doesn't have to be the way it is, right? However, I think many people certainly have had experiences, they've gone in their careers and they've maybe eventually moved into leadership and management roles, but perhaps had negative lessons, I guess you could say, that they learned from a boss, or even a potential boss, right? Somebody they interviewed with and were thinking about working for, and then realized, I didn't exactly like the way they did that. I know I have many of these examples on my end, but is there anything like that that you internalized and you really used? You had things that you learned from people who were really the role models to you, but then certainly there's also those other things that you may think back and remember, what, when I'm in a position where I have that responsibility, I really want to make sure I don't do it that way.
Hmm.
Anything like that you've really held on to and thought about?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of those. A couple come to mind. One is, I've thought a lot about those, because I've had good bosses, I've had not so good bosses for sure. I remember having a couple of bosses early in my career where, I don't know if you ever had this, where like you kind of like hid behind your desk a little bit when they were walking by, like you hoped they didn't stop to talk to you. Or like I had one where I'd take the long route to the bathroom so that I didn't have to walk by his office and risk that he'd call me in. I fundamentally didn't feel comfortable talking to my boss. And I still think about that like as my responsibility now that I'm a boss, leading people, managing people. Like I feel like I need to figure out how to make them comfortable, to
Mhm.
sort of win them over in a sense, like, make them want to talk to me, not feel obligated or nervous to talk to me. And that's something that, comes up in a few places in the book, really, this idea
Right.
of being, I think the best way to do that is to be authentic, to be relatable, to be someone that, they feel like they can be themselves with. So that has stuck with me. The other kind of bad boss behavior that I dealt with at a few points was bosses that they wouldn't give me a straight answer. So, for example, I had this one boss that I did ask for a raise from after realizing that some of my colleagues were making more money than I was.
Right.
And I, really like worked up my whole, pitch and justification and asked in maybe too polite of a way. And he didn't give me an answer. He just said, well, let me think about it. And then he never brought it up again. And I had to ask again. And actually, it was on the third try of asking, like, did you get a chance to talk to HR about that? Did you have any more thoughts? That it became very clear that, the answer was effectively a no, but I didn't know if
Mhm.
he'd ever asked anybody else about it. I didn't work for him for much longer. That was what really set me on a
Right.
path to leave the company I was at and go work for somebody that, at least would be honest with me about where I stood.
Yeah, that one really resonates because, particularly in situations where there's multiple tiers of communication going on, right? So if you
Hmm.
are in some type of middle management role, you're a director of your department and you have your staff, but there's somebody above you who's making decisions about things like raises and promotions, right? And you go to that person and say, look, I think so and so deserves this opportunity, and they give you some kind of answer that you're trying to authentically convey to your
Hmm.
team, and you realize down the line that they're either giving you the runaround or maybe they're just being dishonest, and now it's like, okay, now they've made me into a liar
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
I'm trying to tell my team what was told to me, and I now realize that I wasn't really told the truth, and now you have all kinds of dysfunction, and it's impossible to build any type of an organization like that, right? If people can't really trust you, then all of a sudden they're it's the right thing for them to do, to go in a different direction, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And a quick, clear no is so much more appreciated, I think, by most people than the sort of not giving a straight answer
Yeah.
and dragging it out. And I think it's human nature. It's hard to say no. I think a lot of managers struggle with that, but I think honesty is always better. People will always appreciate it.
I totally agree. So the book is organized into these 9 rules of the good
Mhm.
boss, and we're not going to cover all of them, but we will touch on a handful of them and get into some of the details. And so let's just start with the first rule. Of course, there's certainly a reason why you made it the first rule, and this is about getting a woman's name right and using
Mhm.
her name.
Mhm.
And so, what's so powerful about this? Why is this your number 1 rule?
So the rules are progressive, I would say. And so I start with one that I think not only should everyone follow, but everyone can, right? It's simple, maybe deceptively simple, like get people's names right, pronounce them correctly, spell them correctly. Don't make up a nickname that she never said she uses,
Right.
and so on. And actually, I will say this is the longest rule. It's the longest chapter in the book. When I started out, I remember thinking, like, I don't know, this I don't know, this is going to create a whole chapter. And I just kept going and going. And I found that this resonated with women of all ages, all levels, that this was really something that was weighing on women in terms of their experience in the workplace. It's so common to have someone mix up your name, and it just really channels to somebody that you don't respect them, or you don't think they're important enough to take the time to learn their name and remember their
Right.
name. So I put it first because it has to come first. If you can't give someone that much time, attention, respect to just call them by the right name, how are you going to earn the trust and the respect down the line that you need to like really, really work and really accomplish things together?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as knowing people's names, this is something that, for whatever reason, I don't exactly know why, but I always have a lot of anxiety around it. Even though I can't really think of any circumstance of me getting somebody's name wrong, I'm always very much like, wait a second. I mean, but I can have somebody that I've like known for a while, obviously not known as a super close relationship, but known, and I know exactly what their name is, and yet in my head it's like, wait a
Do
second,
I?
is there something else? And I don't know what it is, but it certainly is an important, powerful thing for any, any members of your workforce who are not in the traditional seats of power, right? The majority. So it's about cultural responsiveness as well, where it's, almost becomes this joke that some people make about, oh, that name's hard to say, it's hard to pronounce. And again, right, it's that indication, like you said, that it's not important enough for me to figure out how to say it correctly or how to remember it. And if I truly value you and respect you in your role, then it's the least I can do is
To get it
get your
right.
name
Yeah.
right, right?
Yeah. I mean, this happens we talk about this in education a lot. Studies show this can really have an impact on a student's experience in the classroom if their teacher isn't getting their name right. And the data on workplace names, use of names, shows that it actually does happen to women more often in the workplace, that someone gets her name wrong, or it's really common to have someone address you by a nickname that you didn't necessarily, choose or use. If I had $1 for every time someone's called me Katie instead of Kate, I would be a rich woman. It happens still regularly, and it's and I think some might say, well, Katie, Kate, close enough, but they're different names.
Right, right. No, there's your chosen name, and that's
Mhm.
what you obviously prefer. And so that's an important starting point. And then we go into the second rule, which is about being authentic. It's being someone that she can relate to and building those authentic relationships. And this is one where I feel that there has been a fair amount of growth in this area over the course of the pandemic,
Mhm.
between bosses, colleagues, people working remotely, that may not have been working remote before the pandemic, or maybe they were, but their kids were at school or somewhere. There was fewer people in the house, fewer things to account for, and I think a lot of people through that learn to be more honest about what they're struggling with and just sharing their lives outside of work. I personally, I've been working from home for 5 or 6 years now, and I found for the first few years of that it was like you almost, I mean, it was extreme to the side of having lesser relationships than you did in the office, for no other reason than it was just there always seemed to be a pressure to get right down to business anytime there was a meeting, maybe
Yeah.
because nobody wanted to be on Zoom or whatever the case may be. There just was no, it felt like any amount of small talk was wasting time. Whereas when you're in an office, it just doesn't quite feel that way. But I think a lot of that has shifted. And now, of course, we're sort of accounting for the different perspectives and attitudes that companies have toward return to office versus hybrid, et cetera. But all of that to say that perhaps we've made some progress here. However, what is important to highlight about this, and knowing about doing it in a way that's healthy and productive, right? And something
Mhm.
where I think all parties involved feel that ability to be authentic, to be honest, to be vulnerable when needed, and feel as though it is strengthening those relationships versus something where it's like I'm giving you maybe some fuel that you can kind of hold against me later if you choose to.
Yeah, or even just giving people the space to share what they want to share, right? There's always this line between you want to, I think as a manager, you want to show that you're genuinely interested and genuinely care about the people you work with, but you also want to be careful not to ask an intrusive
Mm.
question or make someone feel like they have to share. I think social media is one of those really fraught areas. Some people really like to connect with their coworkers on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and some really feel strongly like
Mm.
personal life, work life. So for me, it's this is one of the hardest rules to get to depict universally, because it really is about being nuanced and learning each person that you work with and each person that you manage, and finding the right amount of what you want to share about yourself, which hopefully will make them feel more comfortable sharing in return. And just trying to get the cadence right. A lot of studies of employees show that they do want to feel like they have a friendship with their
Mm.
boss. But there's a specific definition, and we all have this concept of like the work friend versus
Right.
the friend.
Yeah.
And it's true, like there is a little more arm's length about it. And I think this is a really interesting one in the context of post-COVID, more remote work, more engaging on Zoom. I think that there are some easy icebreakers that came this way, right? Like before the invention of virtual backgrounds, which I think has backtracked us a little bit by covering people's natural environments for a while, especially in those early COVID days. You could see where people lived, and you could see their pets and you could see their
Hmm.
kids and the art on their walls and ask questions about it. And it was a way to really ask people about themselves, but on their terms. They were choosing where they sat, and what I know I was very selective back in those days about where I angled my camera, what
Right.
what I showed on the floor and what I didn't. So I think remote work has made it a little easier to break the ice on some of those more personal connections. But it's not really that's just what you're seeing in someone's camera view. I think you've got, as a manager, you've got to really show that you're interested and you're
Yeah.
open, and that usually comes from some combination of sharing about yourself. I think family is often the common connector, right? If you talk about your kids, makes people more comfortable talking about theirs. And the goal is just to let people feel like they can be themselves at work. It's sad, read a lot about how many people don't feel like they can be their authentic selves at work. And my feeling is just, if your goal is to be a good boss, to be successful as a manager, who's going to do their best work for you if they don't even feel like they're being themselves?
Right. Yeah, and so much of the through lines in all of these lessons and these rules is it's about like understanding the perception and relationships that individuals and groups that are a part of would traditionally have to their boss, and proactively addressing those. Right. I mean, I joked earlier about, doesn't everybody kind of hate their boss? I mean, I as somebody who has employees of my own, I hope that's not true. But the point is, like, we have to understand when we're in that role that that's part of the responsibility that we have, is to say, it's not enough for me to just kind of tacitly try to do things in a different way, but I need to understand, like, this is how people feel, this is how they're affected by this. It's a really similar conversation that we have so often in education around students and their relationship to school, and what was their parents' experience like in school, what has their experience been like with their teachers. If they don't feel comfortable in the classroom, for example, they might have a wonderful teacher that isn't necessarily the one that's creating that dynamic. But if that person is not aware of, okay, these are the different traumas or feelings or perceptions that this person is having, then there's something that's going to limit them from reaching their full potential, because they're a little shy, right? They're a little hesitant to put themselves out there because, well, what happens if I'm judged harshly for showing that part of myself? Or if nobody comes to me and explicitly says, I value you, I want to know you, I want to hear about what's happening in your life, then I'm not necessarily going to want to share that, because I don't think that it's going to get me anywhere, right?
It's risky. It feels risky, right, to share. Yeah. Yeah. And I really have a negative reaction to the idea that, if someone is an introvert or is more shy, that, it should be on them to, well, they have to have confidence, they have to learn how to speak
Right.
up for themselves. As a very shy child and quiet student, like, I felt it from back then, that I needed somebody to ask me what I thought. And when people asked that, then I had a lot to say and a lot to contribute. And I think the same is true in the workplace. And I felt that way for a lot of my career. I wasn't necessarily good at interjecting into conversations, but when people asked and cared to hear, I had a lot to contribute. And I do think this other recurring theme throughout the book is just, again and again, putting it back on the manager. Like, you're the one who has the power, you're the one who's in charge. Like, it's easier for you to make it comfortable for the people who work for you than for them to have to assert themselves and sort of change their own environment.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of what you write about in rule number 5, right? Which connects really closely to 2. 2 is about that, authentic and developing relationships. Rule 5 is watch the clock, which is kind of just being aware. And of course, this specifically is with your female employees, who often have the lion's share of parenting responsibilities, and they have a lot of things that they have to kind of toggle between. Being aware of what they're juggling, and where you write, men may be more willing to speak up and enforce that hard stop and say, hey, I have to go do XYZ. A woman may not feel as comfortable to say so. And so whereas the boss, you might be totally flexible, and you would say, oh, well, why didn't you say something? This is about kind of reflecting to ourselves and not not being sensitive or taking it personally or thinking, well, if somebody's not comfortable, then it means that they don't like me. But it's about saying, look, I understand why, when we're in the middle of a work conversation, everybody might not feel comfortable to
Mhm.
say to their superior in this case, right? Hey, I need to go do something that's not work related, right? And understanding that, there also may be extra support or needs that your employees have that you need to tune into, which is, another one that I think we all learn this kind of as we go. Hopefully, if we're continuing to evolve as managers and
Mhm.
executives and such, to say, okay, where are the opportunities to be, again, proactive, and to just say, look, here's the story. If you need this, figuring out when there are people who are not going to ask, but you can tell what they need.
Yeah, and
And
listen also, I mean,
right.
I remember some, sort of at the time they felt like my own horror stories where I would have told my boss going into a meeting, listen, I really need to leave by 6, or I'm not going to get home in time for my nanny. And, you know, 6 o'clock would come and go, and I'd be like waiting and hoping, like, oh, I thought he would say something. I'd be trying to like make eye contact to signal, is it okay for me to go? But I was too nervous in some of those contexts to just say it, in front of other more senior people and be like, hey, I need to leave. Like it was hard. It was genuinely hard to say in some contexts.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think at a minimum, if you're in a management role, just definitely at least listen to people when they do tell you about a time
Mhm.
constraint, and remember, which we all get busy, we forget. I can be a forgetful person sometimes, but I try very hard on that one. If somebody has told me they're going to be late, they're going to leave early, they're going to be out for half a day, whatever it is, to just pay attention and not make them have to, say it again.
Right. Yeah. And then there's also those opportunities that if again, if we're reflective about it, where you have the opportunities to be as generous as you can be with making accommodations, because sometimes there are times where something happens and it can't, like, you're not able to do what you want to do.
Mhm.
But when there's a time where, for example, somebody's having one of the a difficult day for whatever reason, and they ask, oh, can I beg out of this meeting, and I need some time to collect my thoughts, and particularly when we're in this remote work world, and you can say, you know what, actually, uh there's nothing going on that's that critical today. Why don't you like take the rest of the day and kind of
Mhm.
do, and I'm here, like, if you want to talk about it, I'm here, but also I don't really need to know. Like, it's up to you. And
Yeah.
it's not always easy, but it's the kind of thing that's saying people have different, right? There's certain folks who say, I really would like to express to you what I'm going through because I want to feel like I'm able to lean for support. There's other times where it's like, yeah, I mean, if I could just take some time and not be asked, that would be great.
Mhm. Mhm.
And but when the opportunity presents itself to say, hey, yeah, there's literally no downside to this right now, and it's all upside. Take advantage of it, because there might be another day where it's not quite that flexible.
Yeah, yeah, and I do think there's always it's fairly easy to invite someone to share more or talk to you about it more if they want to, without pressuring them to share if they don't want to talk about it. And I think that always giving that open door, if somebody wants to talk, goes a long way.
We'll go to your ninth rule, and this is a big one, and it's one that it relates to a lot of conversations we've certainly had on this podcast. It's tell her that you see her potential, discussing your employee's future and creating those opportunities. And it's a big factor. It's come up a lot here because of its relationship to teacher attrition and
Mhm.
teachers. not feeling that their school is proactive about growth opportunities, just not feeling like, again, I mean, let alone when you go to your boss and say, look, here's what I'm hoping to do, here's where I want to be, and they just don't really get on board with it. But making it part of the culture that you can see those opportunities maybe before your employee even sees them. You can see where they're headed. You can kind of speak that into them. What have you learned about doing this right? Because of course you're wanting to make the right calls about, okay, I can see the potential correctly, and I can see where this person's heading or not. And it's not as simple as just saying, okay, everybody just kind of, it's a free for all. Everybody goes wherever they want to do, but it's also reinforcing that, look, you have somebody on your side who wants to help you to succeed and wants to bring that conversation out and doesn't view it as a threat when people have ambitions.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I think is important to remember is this is the kind of thing, it's important for all employees, regardless of gender identity, to encourage them and to talk about career path, career development. Why is it in this book about supporting women? It's because for women, I think there's a disproportionate need for this because they're not seeing as many role models, relatable role models, representation when they look up at who is in those next roles. And I think that's something that was true for me working in corporate finance. There were predominantly men, male CEOs, male CFOs, and so on that I was working for. I didn't really see anyone where I believed that could be me, or could really easily picture myself becoming that. And I think it's quite true in education as well. My company works with school districts across the country, and there are, obviously majority women in the educator workforce. But when you look at that superintendent's office, it is still by quite a margin majority male. So we have to think about it in these workplaces where the more you rise up, the more likely it is to be a male, to be a white male in particular in a lot of cases. You have to think about what that is leaving as a gap for everyone who's underrepresented, who can't just have that natural affinity, right? And so that's part of why I think it's important to be deliberate in bringing it up and asking, and not just saying, what do you want to do next in your career, but pointing out, where you see somebody who, and saying, I think you could be really great. I mean, I always remember the first time someone did this for me. I had never, I was not one of those people who kind of went through school saying, I'm going to be a CEO. Right. I'm going to run a company. It honestly never occurred to me. Even as I was growing in my career and working for CEOs and working with a lot of CEOs, it still truly never occurred to me that that could be my next step. And then I was was for someone who, he said, I want to talk to you about an opportunity on my team to run a division. And, I was like, that's not what I do. I have this job over here. And he's like, well,
Right.
Where do you see yourself doing in 5 years? Because I think you're going to be a CEO. I think you're going to be a really great CEO. And it was really mind blowing to me that somebody said that to me. And it changed everything about how I thought about what I could be, what I wanted to be. It still took me, frankly, a number of years beyond that to get all the way to thinking that is what I want for myself. I'm going to go for it. But, I don't know when or if I would have thought about it if I hadn't had somebody tell me they saw that in me. It really matters to hear, but we all need positive feedback and positive reinforcement. And especially when it comes to moving up in your career, you don't want to feel like you're always striving or always asking for the next opportunity, to feel like, your boss or even your peers and colleagues see you as somebody who could do that next job. Really, I think it changes everything about how you see yourself. And makes it, that much more likely that you're going to be successful. So what I talk about with my teams now is having a really, purposeful part of, at least their quarterly check-ins, where they talk not just about, the tactical performance feedback, but about what's next, where do you want to learn more in the company, even if it's, cross-divisionally learning something new, like really always having that be part of the conversation so that it's comfortable, and so that when somebody does see another opportunity that they're interested in, they feel like they can legitimately go for it or can legitimately ask about it, and don't feel worried about what the response is going to be.
Yeah. And then you as an organization, you're benefiting from the growth of your team, right? And those conversations are helpful, whether or not it may be the case as it was with you, where that wasn't necessarily what you thought you were headed toward or what you envisioned. There could be other people who they think that's their goal, but they don't exactly know why, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people may want to be at the top level of a company that don't have a lot to do with what the job actually is. But of course, there's a variety of factors. But having those conversations is understanding, here's why I think you'd be good at it. And now you're thinking about why you would want to do that or not want to do that.
Yeah, it could just be very validating, right? That you deserve to be considered. And I think, like you said, I mean, you benefit from having people develop in your own organization. If you don't have these conversations, especially these days, right? Like, then they're going to leave and go take the next step somewhere else. I mean, I think that's what we're unfortunately seeing across education right now, is a lot of people deciding that, they want their next step to be outside of the school. And we see that in our company and are beneficiaries of that talent pool. But it's sad to see, because I do think that there are really great development opportunities inside schools too. And, I think we need to talk about it more.
Yeah. So we haven't talked about all the rules, of course, but you may want to reference one that we have or have not mentioned. But are there any that in your mind you feel that female bosses struggle with more than males? Because we're talking about rules, of course, for being a good boss for your female employees. So a lot of times, of course, these are important because a male may not really think about what's important to female, but there also are other times where we can be harder on the people who are like us, right? And because we have this certain perception of how we did it, or how, okay, well, I got here based on XYZ, so you should be able to do it too. And, when we fail to kind of be reflective or think about, okay, well, everybody's still different. Everybody still needs what they need. It can sometimes be harder to do certain things. In that case, I don't know if has come to mind as you developed any of these, or just in your experience.
So it's really interesting, I would say, over the time that I've had the book out and have been talking about it. I would say the most common question that I get from readers is some version of, hey, it feels like you wrote this book for male managers, for male bosses, but why aren't you talking about how terrible female bosses can be to other women, how terrible women can be to women? That's sort of this common, I don't know, perception, experience, probably some combination, but there's this real pronounced feeling out there that women are not good bosses for other women. And a lot of people do have, their own personal anecdotes about a female boss who, didn't treat them respectfully. And so, it got me thinking a lot and talking a lot about, how are these rules different for male bosses versus female bosses? And, should they be read and thought about differently? And I think there's, I think there's some like rule 2, which we talked about, being relatable, being authentic. I think that's one that's easier for female bosses
Mm.
of women, right? Because they have, they have a gender in common. They have maybe more, easy connecting points. One that I think is harder is rule number 8. I don't know if I'm allowed to say a bad word on this podcast.
Go for it.
Be an equal opportunity asshole. This is one that I definitely wrote it with some of my particular male bosses in mind, who were good bosses to me, but they did it in a way where they were pretty obnoxious. I mean, they were just pretty hard and direct with their advice. And the point that I was making about them was that the way that they were hard on me and gave me the negative feedback was the same way that they treated the men that we worked with. So I felt very equal.
Right.
I didn't feel treated differently as a woman. I think this one is harder for female bosses to find that right line for themselves of being honest, giving direct feedback, particularly given negative feedback. I think that is harder for a lot of women because I think it's not as well received.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's we could go in a whole circle about this one, but I think in general we accept that behavior, and I've come to terms a little bit with maybe I glorified that behavior from male bosses, but do we treat female bosses the same way? I think we're very critical of women who give hard, direct, honest feedback. So there's some of these that I think really are different and harder for women to embrace the rules in the same way.
Yeah, and it almost makes me wonder if part of the exercise, if you are a female boss who's having a little trouble with some of these, if part of it isn't kind of reflecting on them and thinking about, is it that you haven't given yourself permission to be the beneficiary of the rules? Perhaps when you were coming up, you didn't have somebody who treated you this way, so you felt like you had to hide your outside work, and you had to do certain things to get where you got. And what would your life have been like? Or would it have been easier, or would it have just been more comfortable if somebody had been there to treat you like that? And then do you want to then do that for others? You're kind of holding on to those things because you feel like that's how you got there, right? Which can be hard. It's because
well, I dealt with that. You can deal with it too, right? I think there's always some of that, right? That maybe you're harder on other women because you had to go through it. I think there's also different, like I'll say now that I'm in a company that is majority female across all levels, it's easier for me to be in the majority. And I think that's, that's what's underlying a lot of this is it's harder for anyone who is underrepresented, who's not in the majority of, whatever that their workforce is made up of. And in my case, I really see the other side of it now, being in a company that's over 80% female. I'm like, oh, so this is easier. It's just easier to be in the majority.
Absolutely. So here's my last question, and I have no idea what the answer to this would be, but so let's say you are a boss and you've been in your role for a handful of years, right? And you haven't specifically thought through any of these types of strategies or how you enact them. So you haven't, at the very least, you haven't intentionally fostered this type of culture. It's not necessarily to say that you're doing the opposite, but you haven't done it intentionally. And so you may be thinking about it and realize, I'm not actually aware of what do my employees really think about me, or how would they rate me based on these measures, right? And so you want to kind of you're not starting from scratch, you're not starting in a new role, you're trying to now reestablish the type of boss that you are to people who already have one relationship to you. Where would you start? What's the first, whether it's one of these lessons, these rules that you would say, well, try this one first, or is it more of an overall thinking thing to say, all right, I need basically I want to reset here and I want to be more intentional about this. And how do I, how might I go about that?
Yeah, I think, well, I think of the rules we've talked about, the rules in the book, I always really advocate to someone, and you can do the cheat sheet version and read through the introduction without reading every single chapter. My sense is people are different, everyone's different, and most likely one of the rules will just feel more natural. Like,
Mm,
you feel like that's something I could do. I would always say, start with the one that feels like you, right? For some, that might be an equal opportunity asshole. For others, it's not going to be at all. So that's one tactic. But the other thing that I think is just universally not hard to do and always well received is just start asking people what they think in meetings, in
mhm.
business conversation. Don't be weird about it, right? Don't suddenly like sit down with every employee and be like, listen, I haven't done a good job of
Right.
or go saying, I'd love some honest feedback from you about how I'm doing, right? Like those things could be a little awkward, and you might not get a whole transparent list of like what you could do better, but it is always appreciated, and always well received, and it is respectful, and it is a big step to just start listening more than talking, paying attention, and particularly if you're in a meeting, watch who's talking and ask someone who hasn't said anything, what do you think? And that will not only establish you as somebody who listens and somebody who cares to hear the thoughts of others, but it'll actually, it will help you do your job better. To no, nobody has all the answers, right? It is there. Every person knows something that you don't know, or has a perspective you don't have, and so I think if you just start changing the way you interact in meetings, in particular, to start asking other people, what do you think? It starts to open them up and starts to, show them that you do care.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. And making a habit of it, of course, because uh, that person, if you've never asked them before, their first answer might not be the best because they're not expecting to be asked, but ask them again and again, and you get some good
Mm-hmm.
stuff, right? Or you
Mm-hmm.
know what? Just buy the book and then carry the book around the office and say, look, if I'm acting different, it's because I
Because it's
am
rule
I am
number
right.
3.
I'm learning how to be a good boss. And so it's not coming out of thin air.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So, Kate, is there anywhere in particular you'd like to direct our listeners to find you? We're certainly going to put the links to your website and to the book and everything in the show notes. But if there's anything else in particular, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I am always posting on Instagram. It's CEO Author Mom, where I'm always sharing thoughts both on the topics of the book and about my day job at Presence and teletherapy, remote work. So that is one great place to see what I've got going on. And of course, presence.com and all the web information that you've got.
Excellent. Well, Kate, thank you so much for being on The Authority. Listeners, we're going to put the link below to where you can find The Good Boss and more of Kate's work and social media profiles. And, if you're a listener also who is in a position where maybe you're not a quote unquote boss right now, and you're thinking about how can I advocate for my supervisor to use some of these strategies with me, we'd love to hear from you. Send us a note. There might be a lot more to explore here because we know that this relationship dynamic happens from all sides. So we'd love to hear about anything that you're struggling with in that regard as well. So please do reach out. Please subscribe to The Authority for more in-depth author interviews like this one, or visit bpodcast.network to learn about all of our shows. And Kate Eberle Walker, thanks so much for being on The Authority.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Do you want to simplify your school's technology, save teachers time, and improve students' performance on state assessments? You can do it all, but don't waste another minute. Head straight to ixl.com/BE to learn how IXL's research-proven teaching and learning platform can help you achieve all of these goals. That's IXL.com/BE.